So I'm back. I'm going to go ahead and render this using Enscape, which is a plugin for Revit. So to render using Enscape, you're just going to, of course, load Enscape and go to your Enscape tab. And it's going to bring up a separate window. So what you need to do is go to the view, which is helpful, although you can change it later. So I'm in my X01 view that I made. And I'm just going to go to start up here, and what it's going to do is it's going to start Enscape, and it's actually opening on my second screen, so as soon as it kind of gets going I'll minimize and double up my screens here. So I'm just going to restore this guy down and pull the screen that Enscape opened up over here, right? So what Enscape does is it makes a VR version of your screen from Revit. So you've got basically two programs running at the same time, which is fine. And then we can also pull renderings, panoramas, and videos from here. So we're going to do, first we're going to do the still rendering. So let's take a look at our settings that we have for that. So if I go to the visual settings, let's go ahead and start at the capture and work our way back. So on the capture tab, you have the resolution that it's going to save this as, and right now it's Ultra HD, so it's 38 by 40 by 2160. And so what that's going to do is it's actually going to spread that view out to the entire screen. So we'll take a look at that setting first. And then there's also export ID, material ID, object ID, material ID, and depth channel. And then you can set the depth range, how deep you want it, to, it's at 20 meters right now. And then you can do automatic naming and set a default folder. I'm going to set this guy for JPEG right here. And we're going to go ahead and render this guy out. So if I go back to my rendering, right, you have some various options that you can set in here that control how the rendering is going to look. So for example, I could turn on my outlines so you can see it start to sort of give some bold, like SketchUp-y like outlines. So if you want something a little more, or if you wanted it just a white, it will flip the whole thing to white for you so you can get sort of a more light version of it. There's also a polystyrol view, which is a little bit more warm, kind of glowing. And then there's also a light view where it will calculate the incident light falling on the surface and give you a scale up at the top, right? So I'm just going to put mine on none, so it's going to render the materials from Revit. And then you have auto exposure on. If you turn it off, you can come in and adjust your exposure, to what you like. If you turn auto exposure on, it does it itself. I might want this one like a little lighter, but it's up to you. So depth of field, so this will blur, things if you want to do that. And it's auto-focusing with a focal point and a field of view, right? It's 52 degrees, so you can adjust that field of view, obviously right here. So, and then the rendering quality is set to high. We'll go ahead and set it to ultra. And then if we look at the image options, you have highlights and shadows, so you can actually, come in and if you want to mess with the contrast, you can kind of come in and deal with the shadows and the highlights a little bit. So you can kind of just adjust how things are working. I'm not going to go through every one of these. You can kind of play with them. If you go to atmosphere, you can actually get a background. You can't really see the background here because we're pretty close in, but we'll see it later. I'm using a white cubes background. You can also load a skybox, so your own background. You can adjust the clouds and the density and the contrails. Here's the sun brightness, right, and the shadow sharpness. So you go in, you can see the shadows getting sharper or blurrier, right? And if you double click these guys, it'll go back to the default setting. And sun brightness, right? So you can turn it up or down. And again, double click and it goes back to the default. So you can come and play with these settings. But once you've got all of this set up, go ahead and close this guy. And then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to your tools here, and there's render image. And you can render image using the top one, which sends it to a dialog box and you send it to a folder, or you can actually render an image into your Revit document. So it'll actually add a renderings category over here, and it will put that rendering there. I'm going to render out, so I'm going to click on render image, and it's going to ask me which view would you like to render, and it's and you can just render the current Enscape viewport, right? And so if we go ahead and render that, it's going to, so it's giving us a adjust and confirm safe frame because the safe frame is on, and if it looks okay, so you can see it's showing you what it's going to render because the resolution is set at that size, right? And so I'm just going to click OK, and I'm going to render that out, and let's put it on my desktop. Let's do a new folder. I'll call it render images. Okay, and we'll save that, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at that render folder on my desktop. So now you can see over here it's rendering out the image, so I'll pause while it's rendering. Alright, so that took about a minute, so it wasn't very long. And then you can see here are the render images that came out, right? The depth, the material ID, and then the object ID. So it just gives you masks that you can use in Photoshop. There's also an EXR option for rendering out different channels, but I've been unable to get that to work, so I'm going to keep working on that guy. Okay, so